good are you at spotting strategic gaps as a leader? What if I told you that seeing and utilizing strategic gaps is a game changer for leaders at every level? Well, today, my guest, Ashley Wright, is digging into how, as a serial entrepreneur, but also somebody who's worked at every single kind of company over her career, she has taken the lessons from her career and use those in the corporate world, also in the consulting world, to be the person that is known as somebody for spotting those strategic gaps and knowing when to jump and when to hold back, what it looks like, how she makes decisions. We dig into everything from how to make decisions and why you should never do that from a place of fear, what it looks like to make a good decision in terms of forecasting, how to use a top-down and a bottom-up approach to identify the right gaps and know what to address. We talk about how to create opportunities for your team by making sure that they are doing different work from what you would do rather than similar work from what you would do, but also making sure your team are growing and knowing which team members to support when and how. And then a very important lesson, and learning how to jump ahead instead of playing catch up. There's so much to take away from this episode, whether you're an entrepreneur or a leader, allowing herself to go to that next level. There's so many little nuggets of wisdom that we dive into. So without further ado, let's get Ashley onto the show. Welcome to the show, Ashley. Thank you for joining us today.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here talking about your work as a startup owner. But tell me, how did you get to the point where you are today? I know you've worked at McKinsey, but how did everything that happened early in your career shape how you've approached what you do today?
Yeah. So I started out in small town, Illinois, and I worked with my mom in different little garden centers. I was always a little entrepreneurial as well. I would split and sell my mom's hostas, which is a leafy green plant, out of my driveway first, but I was in the country and there were no customers. So then out of my best friend's driveway.
Wow.
So always looking for an opportunity to kind of seize and make a little money off of when I was younger. But that moved me on to, I went to undergrad at Wisconsin and came out at Wisconsin and did marketing for a bit in General Mills, worked in some brand partnerships there before moving on to business school at UCLA. Actually starting my first startup there during business school. Did a little bit of strategy consulting, hopped around after that to like a larger startup, Series A, Series B. And then just ended up landing on Plantista, actually coming out of a startup accelerator in Boulder, Colorado. So have kind of spanned the gamut of everything from startup that I'm founding to larger startup to, consulting to full corporation. I guess I haven't been able to stick in just one.
Well, tell us about Plantista. Obviously, you told me about it, but tell the audience about it. Like, how did you land on that? Partly from the strategic gaps perspective, because when we were talking before hitting record, one of the things that really stood out to me was your ability to see gaps in a market, gaps of something to solve, which I think is why you were such a great consultant at McKinsey. How is that formed into your startup state, I guess? And why Plantista? What was the gap you saw?
Yeah. So Plantista is AI technology for the green industry. So we primarily sell to garden centers and landscape designers to help them scale and grow their businesses. And I think in identifying this opportunity, we had seen vertical SaaS or vertical software. I had seen it through McKinsey really hit every single industry. However, the green industry has always been a little bit siloed off. I think this is largely because there's not very many public companies. It's all generations owned family companies. So it's been an interesting industry to begin with. But then I think the thing with AI and AI in this space, AI is really good. I've seen it be really good at being able to take a whole bunch of data that is perhaps not linear, and ingest it and output, an answer or a visual or things like that. And if you look in the green industry, plants are inherently ungoogleable,
Yes.
is what I like to say. So it's also location specific, location dependent. There are tens of thousands of plant species, tens of thousands of qualities about all of those plant species. And so it just seemed to be, I would say, a good tool to come into the industry. The other piece that I will say, and this is the final piece with the industry, there tends to be a like, why me, why now type rule that I like to follow and go by. And in terms of the why now for this industry, up until about 5 years ago, inventory was not computerized in this industry. So if you think about that from a tech perspective, you were pretty much blind to what was happening in any of the garden center businesses. You didn't know, they didn't really know, and you certainly don't know what's coming in, what's going out. It was all just done by visual, which is wild to, a lot of companies. But really, there's been a big shift in the industry within the last 5 to 10 years or so, that it's not just your most advanced garden centers that are computerizing their inventory and keeping track of everything. It's really a majority of them. So that gives us the ability then to bring in technology and be able to see and help in a way that would have never been possible previously when my parents had their little garden center back in the day in Illinois.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that the plants are inherently ungoogleable? So funny because my husband has an app on his phone to identify plants, and I'm pretty good with plants. I'm the gardener in the family, not him. But there was a plant I was like, I kind of know what this, but I don't know what it is. And so he used his app to identify it, and he was like, it's this, and they're like, okay, yeah, that's right, that makes sense. And I checked it up on the Royal Horticultural Society website, which is a website I really trust here in the UK for plants. Right, great website.
Yes.
But his app was telling him it doesn't deal with frost, whereas the RHS website was saying in -15. There's so much information out there that I think what you're trying to tackle with Plantista is really interesting. So how do you deal? This is kind of going off piece a little bit, but it's really important from a tech perspective and AI. How do you deal with the fact that there's so much inaccurate data out there? Is that something you're addressing with Plantista at all?
Yeah, it's interesting because in this industry, I would say there is a lot of gray. So it's not black and white, right or wrong. That piece of info might be right for a specific species or variety of that plant in a specific area. So there are so few things that are, it's right or it's wrong. It's all about bringing context to it. But I will say, as we were building up our own plant care database, which spans all the different zones, right, where your care is going to differ. And even as we were building out our AI design library and things like that, we have a team of horticulturalists on our side, each of them from different zones. And they are constantly fact checking everything and adding in nuggets there. So it's, AI in this space and in most spaces, I would say, is not going to replace and not meant to replace the expertise of people. It's meant to scale their expertise.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's really where we try to bring in it. But it is interesting. I mean, when we were first doing AI landscape design, it would plot not even plants in some of these designs. So maybe there was like a woman with the same name as a plant genus, which happens, a bit. And it would just plot a woman in the design. And we were like, okay, we can't have that.
That is so fascinating, isn't it? I mean, this is the problem with AI. I think it's a challenge that most people are like, oh, AI is the future, it's going to take over everything, but it still needs us to give it the expertise and in the right way as well. I mean, I know that's not what we're here for, but I want to ask you one more question about AI, which is about the training data. Because one of the reasons why I thought AI was such an incredible tool was that the AI was one of the first big uses of AI was a diagnosis of things. They were giving X-rays, medical data to AI that are giving it the information of the world expert. Like, this is what I see on this image, or this is what I see on this X-ray. this photo, whatever. And it was better able to diagnose cancers, the various other things than most doctors, because it was trained by experts. But we're now in the age, I was listening to a podcast yesterday where somebody said that they were seeing more and more people coming to them because AI had said that might be a melanoma or something like that. Because ChatGPT is trained on everything on the internet, including articles which are, this is a melanoma and this is not a melanoma. And so it's correlating any article that says melanoma with both positive and negative images because we're not training it right. It's not got the context. Do you see that as something that is ever going to change? Is that just it learning how to read the articles better and put two and two together and make four rather than 20? Or do you feel like you've got any insight into that at the moment?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as you were going through it, it made me think of things that happen in our industry as well. And I actually think it's less of the model isn't trained well. I think in that, like in a lot of these cases and in our industry, it's that the prompt perhaps
yes, prompt engineering, right?
specific. And so that's a thing where if you ask a really broad question, you're going to get back a really broad answer. And so in that instance, if I'm just like, is this, spreading spot on my skin melanoma? It's probably going to be like, yep. Or something like that. It's quite generic and it really doesn't probe you, which I think could be something that would be really helpful and beneficial. It's similar when, we have Alice, the AI chat assistant, that she helps people with plant care and plant choice or AI design. We actually feed them through a certain series of prompts because otherwise, if somebody just says, what's a good full sun garden? She'll answer, but you don't is that a good full sun garden for Florida or, London or Canada? And she's not asking, or the AI is not asking, I refer to it as a she just because of the Alice AI assistant. But the AI isn't asking the clarifying questions that would actually help it get to the answer that it can deliver you.
It's so fascinating you say that because I am building a house, or will be in the next few years, and we've got 2 acres of land to garden, to landscape. And so and we've moved within the country as well. So it's a new climate here. I have a fairly good understanding of it, but it's different from where we used to live. So I have been very specific about this is where I live. This is how cold it gets. We're this high above sea level. We're this far from the sea. Will this plant work? What are the downsides? What if it's very boggy and wet here? But then we do get 3 months of drier weather. So it has to be able to deal with a little, it's very complicated gardening here. Beautiful, but complicated.
Totally. And then you will, or I don't know if you've run into this before, but then it also is, we're in an interesting space and time period with AI where if you over engineer your prompt and give it too much information, it actually will overload the AI, and the AI will only focus on specific pieces of your prompt and ignore others. And it won't tell you which ones it's ignoring. And so
I always think you have to do them iteratively. You've got to do one thing and then another, right?
That does help, for sure. So it's how do you give it, enough info, but not too much info, it's a little fickle right now.
Yeah. It's getting better. I do think it's getting better.
It is.
But it is. Well, okay, let's go back to what you do. I think it's such a cool conversation about AI. I just love it. But you said something a few minutes ago that really just stood out to me. You said you follow why me, why now? And given that we're talking about spotting strategic gaps, tell me about that. What is this philosophy? Why me, why now? From a startup perspective, or just seeing strategic gaps that you as an individual can fill, even if you were working for somebody else. What do you mean by why me, why now?
Yeah, I think in the terms of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ideas, it can be a little overwhelming because truly you could do anything, right? You're not constrained to an industry or you're not constrained to an idea. And so it can be a little, at least to me, feel a little bit overwhelming when I start thinking through ideas. But I have found, and this was actually something that they taught in the Boulder Startup Accelerator as well, everyone has a lot of ideas. However, actually executing the idea and getting traction off of it, that's the hardest part, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So two things you can ask yourself. Number one is, why me? Like, likely you're not the first one to have this idea. There's been a lot of people who have had the ideas. So what is it about you or what is it about me that I have this insight or this background, that, I can move a little quicker. I'm a little bit more insightful. And then, so for me, that was just kind of being from the green industry in this space, which is big, especially because I mentioned it was a bit siloed off. And then why now is, most of the time when people's startups fail or things, you hear like, it just wasn't the right time. And so I think that is one piece, but also startups are hard and you need a lot of tailwinds, like pushing you along. And so the why now piece, it's, if this is a really great opportunity and moment for this, then maybe that can 10x the effort that you're putting in, because there's a lot of momentum there already. And a really good why now is one, technological changes and shifts, which I feel like we're, very privileged to be living in this age. There's a new technological advancement, like, every day, every week, etc. Also, policy changes can be really big. So just keeping an eye and monitoring policy changes, which there also are a lot of now as well, but that can also create market opportunities. And then if you're the first one to jump on that, that can be a really significant place to grow. And I think it's a bit the same whether, you're a solo entrepreneur or working within a big company. I think within a big company or a large organization, I would say it tends to be more about like starting with, how do I identify the gap, and then have the guts to do it, etc. Because you're a bit more constrained, or like you have your space. The world isn't your oyster, really. So it's how do you identify that gap and get real and have the guts to fill it. But there is a little bit of like, why me, why now in that as well. And, why are you the right person to take on to have this insight or take on this challenge within the company?
Actually, something that you've hinted at is obviously you have grown from being a solopreneur to being a CEO. You've got people working for you now. How do you see why me, why now evolving as you've gone from starting out to having a team? A CEO today, are you still asking the right questions? How do you know you're asking the right questions? How have the strategic gaps changed simply because you're a CEO leader rather than a solopreneur? Like, what goes on there?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, and it made me think a bit. So I think that why me, why now, when I first started, taking that into account, it's about the industry and the idea. And now that I am leading a team, it becomes like much more team focused, I would say. And the why me becomes, should I be the one leading this, or like, should somebody else on my team be leading this? Do I have some kind of magic insight here, or am I really just making it up? And somebody else with expertise, or just a gut feeling like I should kind of stand down and let them run with it. So I think that's like a big thing. And of course we have constrained resources, so I would love to have way more folks lead things. I'm not trying to. I was never one that wants to control everything, but that does come into place in terms of why me. And then I think the why now is all about product prioritization and road mapping.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Comes up a lot. And so again, there are, especially when you're in vertical SaaS, there are theoretically unlimited things you could develop. And unfortunately, the team does not have unlimited time to develop said things. And you're always getting, requests from customers, which are, paying you money. You want to keep them happy. So it becomes, how do we prioritize the roadmap? And yes, maybe we can get this really sexy thing out in, 6 months. But actually, if it takes us 6 months, maybe we're going to miss that sales cycle already. So we might as well prioritize the number 2 sexy thing, and actually just wait on that second thing until the start of the next sales cycle. So really thinking about the strategy behind why you're releasing what and when.
Yeah. It's actually so interesting you talking about that, because you're coming out from the entrepreneurial startup mindset, but I've worked with so many leaders in like strategy officers, commercial officers, heads of product in larger companies and well-established companies, who the thing I'm always calling them out on is you're playing catch up with your competitor here. They're always going after the sexy thing their competitor has just released. And I'm like, well, you play catch up, you will always be playing catch up. What you need to do is jump. You have to just miss out this cycle or the next 2 cycles, even depending on what your industry is, where, some things can take, 5 years to come to fruition in some of the big industries. And while you are in the catch up mindset, and it boggles my mind that big, Fortune 500 companies still think catch up rather than jump. But you've got that jump mindset, and I love that. Where did that come from? Like, when did you realize that you can't just play catch up, that you have to sometimes jump ahead? Because that is a lesson I've tried to help so many leaders understand, and they don't get it. I think it's scary.
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing that comes to mind here, I tend to be a bit competitive.
Just a little bit. I think you have to be an entrepreneur, right?
And maybe this started when I was in gymnastics. I grew up doing gymnastics as a kid. And I do think in that there is a little bit of like, if you're just always, learning the trick the girl ahead of you just learned already, you're always going to be doing it like a little bit worse. And like your score is going to be a little bit lower. Whereas like if you could just say, okay, I'm actually not going to I'm not going to try and have that trick in my floor routine or in my bar routine. I'm going to try for this other thing that's going to be uniquely me. I think that was a way in gymnastics. You're constantly, you're part of a team and you want your team members to win. And you're also individually competing. And so I hadn't really thought about it through that lens, but I do remember specifically when I started at General Mills, they were all about play to win. And, that was really like coached among the organization. And I got landed, my first role there with a brand that nobody really cared about anymore. It was like, oh, we'll give the new girl this brand that's been, flat to declining for a long time. We're just going to use it as a cash cow, et cetera. And I remember in a meeting challenging my manager and being like, well, am I going to play to win or am I just playing to compete? Because if I'm just playing to compete, here's my plan. And like, here are the expected outputs. And this is what it's going to be. And if that means that another brand gets that extra budget and is playing to win, and like, that's our strategy, great. But if you want me to play to win, I can on this brand. And here is what that strategy looks like. And I do remember this is one of my favorite managers ever. She was a little taken aback and probably kind of smirking at my 22, 23-year-old gregariousness, and was basically like, let's play to win. And so she very much, I would say, in that position and like supported me, had my back, knowing that this was a little bit different. But I totally agree with that. And I think another piece of, playing to win versus compete, not just following what others are doing, is I've always found that when I make decisions out of opportunity versus decisions out of fear, those are the better decisions. And so if I ever am starting to think that I'm making a decision out of fear, which can be the case for a lot of publicly traded corporations, you're trying to maximize your quarterly returns, I would say a lot of experimentation is not always rewarded in publicly traded companies as well. You can lean into this fear-based decision making of, I don't care if I win, but I just don't want to lose. And to me, that was never exciting. I was always kind of like, no, if I'm here, like, we're going to win or we're going to die trying.
I love that. You have such an important insight there, which is make decisions from a place of opportunity instead of fear. And I'd say so much of the coaching I do is stepping away from the fear, recognizing, first of all, that fear is playing a part. And I think so much of the time we don't think fear is playing a part until somebody calls it out. But then stepping away from it and allowing ourselves to really understand that fear is in there. And while you were sitting in that place of fear rather than opportunity, you aren't going to make good decisions. I have a pact with myself, if you like, which is I don't make decisions from a place of fear. I will wait. I will do the mindset work. Sometimes it takes quite a long time. And that can be frustrating because I'm holding something that is hard to hold, or my team's waiting on me. But it's allowing me to move through to, well, where is the opportunity here instead of the fear? I think that's such a big one. It actually does bring me back to something you were talking about earlier, which is the delegation piece. I think a really interesting thing to look at is, especially because as an entrepreneur, I think we really feel this, like we feel we should hold it all, right? But at the same time, I see this in leaders as well as they elevate their career. It's like learning what to delegate. And I see two extremes: the people that hold on to everything to the detriment of the business because they can't do everything anymore. Plus, they're not necessarily the right person to do everything. But also then the trap I've fallen into is having been burned by micromanagement, delegating everything and assuming my team can do it without me. My philosophy today is hold on to the things that are the number one priority in the business. Or for a leader, the number one priority for their line of work, whatever it is they do. Is it different for you? How do you make those decisions on what to hold on to and what to delegate?
I tend to hold on to the key metrics and key deliverables and hold myself responsible for those. So at the end of the day, whether I'm, the VP of a division or I'm the CEO of a company, that's my responsibility to deliver, right? And to know exactly what I need to deliver, and be really clear about that. From there, and this is just, I have not worked well in situations, being a more competitive, maybe a little bit more creative type of individual where I am told exactly how I need to get to those metrics. I want to come up with it myself.
Yeah.
And I'll test into it and I will work so much harder to make it happen if I can have that ownership. And so I try to do that same thing with my teams or anyone I'm managing. And I did this in previous positions as well, is, make sure each person is clear on which metrics they're accountable for delivering. And then have these weekly check-ins with them where you're holding them accountable. You know where the progress is, et cetera. So it's less risky. But then I really just see my role as, helping coach or refine and or helping remove barriers. And giving them that runway to be able to deliver and maybe exceed those metrics on their own. I do think that's heavily reliant on having very good team members and very motivated team members. And so that is, especially when you're managing in a remote workplace where that might take a little bit of time to understand, the caliber of your team. That can be a little bit risky, but I think as long as you have these regular check-ins, where things are going. And then if the ship's starting to sink on one side, you can jump in. But if not, what a great place to be in where you're giving your team these opportunities to be creative and learn and, hit your metrics for you.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's the thing to me is a lot of the time my team is better equipped than I am to hit some of these metrics. So why wouldn't I encourage that? So I love that. Final question before we move on to the quick fire round. If you could give a leader advice with all the stuff you've learned spotting strategic gaps, building opportunities, if there was one piece of advice you wish that you'd had earlier in your career, or like the key thing that makes you successful, what would that piece of advice be?
I think I'm gonna give two. I'm gonna cheat a little bit because it's hard. It's hard to choose.
It's hard,
one.
yeah.
But I would say one thing for leaders in businesses, and I saw this, within corporations that I worked in, and also in consulting as well, is do your top down and bottoms up forecast. Like identify what that gap is and be really real about addressing it. And I think that is something that a lot of times, people can get a little bit afraid of. And in the entrepreneurial world, if your industry is growing, let's say you chose a great industry with 35% growth, that means that you need to be growing faster than 35%. Otherwise, you're actually shrinking in relation to the industry. And so just being really attuned to what those market factors are, where you're playing, and what that means in terms of how fast you have to grow and your plans to get there and where there's a gap, and filling it, whether that be with a new product or bigger sales motion or things like that. Like, I think that's really important. And I think it's something that, I've seen people shy away from a lot and just kind of close their eyes and expect and hope for the best. I think the other thing I would say is and this will play off of the last piece that we just spoke about, but to create opportunities for people on your team or others. Just create opportunities and make sure that you're not just doing it for people who are similar to you. I think like very early on in my career, again at Mills, certain people are gonna, maybe show up at 10 a.m. for work instead of 8 a.m. But that is because they are like a creative mindset that is going to spin and build this like whole creative deck between midnight and 2 a.m. because that's when their brain works well.
That's me. My brain fires up at like 10 p.m. It's so frustrating.
And like who cares that they're not there?
I don't fit into the normal 9 to 5, but actually, I mean, that's one of the reasons I run my own business, so I don't have to fit into a 9 to 5, right?
Or maybe they don't speak exactly like everyone else is, speaking.
Yeah.
And they're more I got this a lot actually early on because I'm a bit more casual versus formal in my business speak, and I actually find that to be an asset because I think I can form relationships with people, really dig into what's wrong a bit easier being casual versus formal. But I got a lot of coaching early on that was like, you're being too casual. You need to be more formal, etc. So I think it's that creating opportunities, making sure it's not just for people who look like you, and then like really defending different work styles and seeing that as a asset versus, something that is anything other than that.
To me, it should be what somebody delivers, not how they deliver it. If they are delivering something significant for your business, I don't care how they work, when they work, as long as they're not burning themselves out, that I care about. Because that's not sustainable for the business. It's actually, that's in the business interest to like not allow them to do that.
Right. Or stepping on others' toes. Or,
upsetting people, toxic culture, anything like that. Absolutely. But if they are operating in their own little way, as long as they're not hurting others by doing so or themselves, then great, go to it. I don't care how you work. I don't care what hours you work. Do you. I love that.
Exactly.
I love that so much.
Don't like over feedback them.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that you were told like that you weren't formal enough. I mean, I'm all about executive presence, but I think we've got to have authentic executive presence. And part of that is using your authentic persona. There are cases, like if you're talking to a board, some formality is just a good idea, right? But like going in swearing is not going to do you any favors. But I feel if people were telling you that you weren't formal enough, I have a challenge. There's part of me that's like viscerally reacting to that, even though I teach executive presence every day to my clients. But it's about finding a way to show up with confidence, gaining respect, knowing that you're worth being in the room rather than about your tone or your language, or it's about your body language, yes, and being conscious of it. So I would, as a coach, I would say, I'm sorry that you had that experience, because I'd have been like, let's talk about results. What results are you getting? Is that working for you? So
yeah. Absolutely. No, thank you. I think I've always been a little bit of, I can kind of brush things off too and be like, well, we'll just see in a couple months. Like,
Yeah, that's the right attitude, in my opinion.
if
Absolutely.
it's helpful and you would change your mind later on or not. But appreciate that. It is it's a piece of feedback other women, female friends have also received. You need to be a little bit more New York, a little less Colorado.
Oh my goodness me. Ladies,
Yeah.
if you're listening to this, I want you to know from me to you, and actually just listen to Ashley's success here. You don't need to listen to that. What you need to do is figure out what's working for you, ladies. So if you're listening, if someone's giving you that feedback, come and have a chat with me, or go and talk to somebody else who can give you some feedback about whether or not it's genuinely holding you up rather than they want to put you in this mold because that's how they think women should show up, because that's not necessarily the right thing. I'm sorry, Ashley. Right. Let's go on to the quick fire round. Some fun questions for you. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, besides that little piece of feedback, I would say I got another one, which is don't show too much praise or gratitude to your team, because then it doesn't mean as much coming from you when you're this senior leader. And I disagree.
Absolutely. Again, that's one of those things. I've heard this so many times. I've heard really well-intentioned people say, don't overpraise. I'm like, you actually can't praise too much. And it allows you to then, when you do say something constructive, they really hear because it's different. As long as you're not doing the so-called, excuse my language, but shit sandwich, that doesn't work. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think something that I heard, I don't even know where I heard this, but it was, you can either live your life trying to make someone else's dream happen or live it trying to make yours happen. And that has always stood out to me because I mentioned I'm a bit competitive. I'll throw myself into whatever I'm working on. And so as I've gotten older, I've learned to be more intentional with where I'm throwing that energy and that time.
Interesting. Yes, be intentional with how you use your energy and time. I love it. What is the last book you read or listened to, and would you recommend it?
Yes. So I am a huge podcast listener.
Okay.
It's how I prefer to digest information. I like to do things, but I'm currently reading / listening to a book that I heard on a podcast that's called Secrets of the Spracker. Have you heard of this?
No.
It is Iceland's first lady who wrote it. And it is about basically like what a society would look like with more gender parity. So Iceland has, I think, the best stats in the world for this. But this was actually recommended by Margaret Atwood on a podcast that I was listening to, and she is incredible just to listen to her speak. So anyways, I'm in the middle of it, and it's living up to Margaret Atwood's recommendation.
I do feel like maybe we're telling a little bit to our audience about who we are here, but I think almost anything Margaret Atwood recommends is definitely worth a listen or read. I think, especially in this day and age, maybe our audience is learning a little bit too much about us and our politics, but yes, something definitely worth to pay attention to. This has been an amazing conversation. So where can we find out more about you, Ashley? Where can we find out about Plantista if we're interested, about anything you've done with AI? Where can we find you online?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Ashley Wright 3. You can follow Plantista on LinkedIn. It's Plantista. You can also join our crowdfund right now, which is currently live. I don't know exactly when this will be airing, but it'll be live through approximately mid-June, likely. And that is on Indiegogo. It's under Plantista. And we are raising money to build a AI firewise landscaping model, which can actually be used to help protect homes from wildfires. So this is a bit more complex than our other AI design models. It's taking into account not just plant choice, but also different restrictions and rules and things. So you actually can get access to the Plantista products, which are usually only available through garden centers directly for contributing to the crowd fund. So that would be my other little plug for anyone who wants to dabble.
Excellent. Well, there's links for everybody listening. Those links are in the show notes. Go click over, take a look, and do consider, especially something that whole using AI to help us with wildfires, I think is a biggie. So definitely something I would encourage. If you have found Ashley inspiring and think she might just be the person to write a good piece of software or lead the team writing a good piece of software, might be worth considering. Obviously, no investment advice. This has been fabulous. So what would you say is the key takeaway you want to leave everybody with? What's the final thought to leave us with today, Ashley?
Yeah. So true to form, I'm just gonna end with two things because I can't choose between the two. But number one is the pie isn't fixed. Whether it is an industry and how much you can grow, or I even see this sometimes among particularly like women in the workplace of, she was promoted and I wasn't, or she's making more and I'm not. The pie isn't fixed. We can all make more and you can grow it's not, my segment of the business or your segment of the business. Like we can get into that mindset a little bit, I think, because we're thinking about resources and constraints, but it's not actually a closed circle. There's room to grow and there's room for everyone to win. I think my other thing is to have confidence, even and especially when you're an only in the room. And I think I saw this a lot in consulting, whether it was I was more casual because I was from the Midwest versus the coasts, and I didn't have a crazy Ivy League education, or a lot of times I was the only woman, or, there are all these instances where people can come into being an only. And I think it's really important to have confidence in those situations and trust yourself and your intuition, because you pick up on things in the room that others don't. And you see different angles that no one else can or does. And it is really important to bring that to the table, have confidence in that, because that is your unique contribution. And it's important.
I love that. There's such a beautiful note to leave on. There's so many nuggets today. I'm just going to summarize a few of them for listeners. There's the right time, right place, but the way you say it is, am I the right person doing the right thing, or the who and the what? And I think that's so important. There's also something I love talking about was learning to jump ahead instead of playing catch up all the time. I think that's such an important lesson for every single leader out there. Making decisions from a place of opportunity rather than fear, even if it means you have to hold off making a decision until you've got through your fear, you've dealt with it. I think it's such an important lesson for all of us. And those final two that you've just left us with, it's something actually we didn't talk about at all, which is there's room for all of us to grow. There's room for everybody to win. And I think so much of the time we are in this competitive mindset of like, well, she's got ahead, so I can't, which is why we don't help other women, and why sometimes women are our worst enemies to each other. And there is plenty of room. I can tell everybody this from having worked for years, coaching over 1,000 women at this point. There is plenty of room for us all. We don't have to, excuse my language, but screw each other over. We really don't. So lean into lifting each other up. And it's just a beautiful world to live in when we do that, despite everything else going on around us. Thank you, Ashley, for being here. Thank you, listeners, for listening. I would love for you to pop into LinkedIn and send over to Ashley and me, what would you say is the biggest change you're going to make based on today's conversation? How are you going to change the way you're approaching work? How are you going to change the way you're leading? How are you going to change the way you turn up to conversations based on this? There's so many amazing nuggets in this conversation. So I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you're thinking. But in the meantime, keep changing the world. Keep being the woman who's there saying there's room for every single one of us at the top.